My name is Katie, welcome back to my channel, Life Between Words. Middle grade March has come to an end as of a week ago when I'm filming this. Probably longer when you're seeing it. I know I'm a little late with my wrap up, so let's just get into it. I got people to do, things to see. Let's switch that around. Things to do, people to see. The day is moving on, and I would like to read a little bit this afternoon. I'm on a roll with my reading in April and I just want to keep going. As I'm filming this, it is 25 in 5, which means read for 25 hours in 5 days. I think it's being hosted on Instagram. I have no idea whether people on YouTube are as familiar with it as in the Instagram world, but I am participating and I'm doing great. I've already finished a book. No, I finished 2 books. So that's amazing, but that's not what we're here to talk about. We're here to talk about the books that I read in March, most of which I read for middle grade March. It was an amazing month, you guys. Almost every book I read I loved, which I can't say happens very often. But I did read one adult book, so let's start with that one. The adult book that I read this month was The Immortalists by Chloe Benjamin, and I buddy read this with Heather from Bookables. This is my signed copy of The Immortalists. I had the chance to go hear Chloe Benjamin give a book reading and also just talk a little bit about the book the week that it was released. It is about 3 siblings who in 1969, when they're all kids in New York City, find out about a woman who is able to predict the day that someone will die. So the siblings each go and get their fortune told by this woman, and then the book follows each of those siblings up until that day when they are predicted to die. It's all about how you would live your life if you knew the date you were going to die, and it's also about what is choice and what is fate, and how much of it is each. And the way the book plays out, you're never really sure. It really could kind of be either one. The book was very well written, and it was very interesting. None of the characters were likable, which was a little bit hard. I could see myself revisiting this book in the future, but it was not, my favorite book ever. I feel like it was really, really hyped up, especially on Instagram, and it didn't quite live up to those expectations for me. But I did think a lot while I was reading it. It was very thought-provoking, and I really enjoyed buddy reading it because there was a lot of fodder for conversation. The first middle grade book that I read, which I loved, by the way, but I do feel like it kind of got overshadowed by some of the books I read later in the month that just kind of blew me away. And when I read this, it did blow me away, but I didn't connect with it in my heart as much as I connected with some of the other books. So that was The Bone Sparrow by Zaina Fralin. This book, more than anything else, gives us a glimpse into the lives of refugees once they've made it out of their country and into a new one. Particularly in Australia, where refugees can be held in basically a camp indefinitely. The little boy that we're following, named Subi, has lived in this refugee camp his whole life. He was born in it, and now he's 9 years old, and so he's lived there his whole life. He doesn't know anything outside of the fenced-in camp. And we're following just his story living in this refugee camp. It's incredible, it's heart-wrenching, it's very, very sad. Like I feel middle grade should do. It doesn't necessarily leave you feeling hopeless, even though the situation is very dire. So by the end of the book, you feel like your heart has been ripped out of your body, but it's being put back together a little bit. So you feel like your heart has been ripped out of your body, but you don't end the book feeling like all hope is lost. And in fact, you do leave the book feeling hopeful that that Subi's life will be better, and that perhaps through books like this, the lives of refugees in general can be better. And the book itself, I mean, look at how beautiful the design of this book is. It's quite stunning. And I highly recommend everyone pick this up. It was quite an astounding novel. I also am rereading, or at least hope to reread through all of the Chronicles of Narnia this year, and I'm reading them with Kate Howe, which is just magnificent because I love Kate. So we are reading them in the original published order, i.e. the right way to read the books, and I will fight you about this. Publishers now have changed the order so that they're chronological, but I prefer to read them and think that they are best read in the order in which they were published, which means I start the series reading The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe by C.S. Lewis, obviously, And I loved this reread. I thought it was wonderful and magical, and every time I read these books, I get more and more out of them. I just feel like they're so wise and warm, and I love Aslan so much, and the world of Narnia in general. It is beautiful. I also read another children's classic for middle grade March, and that was The Little White Horse by Elizabeth Goudge. My mom got this book for me for my birthday, and I've heard of The Little White Horse. I read one Elizabeth Goudge book last year, but it was meant for adults. This, of course, is her children's classic, and it was written in like the 1940s, I think. This is a Folio Society edition. I just hit myself in the glasses. This is a Folio Society edition. It's gorgeous, and it was a beautiful experience to read this book in this edition, because just the quality of paper and the typeface and all of the illustrations and the way that it's bound, it's just a gorgeous experience start to finish. For those of you who don't know, The Little White Horse was one of J.K. Rowling's favorite books growing up, and so it's been on my list to read for quite some time because of that. And I have to say that I loved it. I thought it was charming and magical, and it reminded me of a lot of books from this time period that just feel very warm and inviting. There's a lot of whimsy in it. There's a lot of humor in the book. It's full of characters that are really quirky. I really, really, really loved it. And I feel like I missed out by not reading this book when I was little, because the environment, when she moves to this castle, her family's ancestral home, the way it's described is so visceral, and I want to live there. It was wonderful. Yeah, I feel like I missed out, like I said, by not reading this when I was a kid, but I'm glad that I read it now. It's about a young girl named Maria Merriweather who is orphaned, and with her governess is sent to live with her uncle, I believe, at Moonacre Manor, and just the adventures that she goes on, and sort of a mystery having to do with her family, and kind of like a curse that she is determined to break. And I thought it was a fun middle grade adventure story. Now we are getting into my very favorite books from the month. I will start by talking about Wishtree by Katherine Applegate. This came out last year, and quite honestly, I'm shocked that it didn't either get a Newbery Honor or the Newbery Medal itself. Maybe it's because Katherine Applegate has already won a Newbery Medal, but nevertheless, I thought this book was so beautiful, beautifully written, beautifully told. It's very short, and it's about it. The entire book is told from the perspective of an oak tree who has always lived outside of these two houses, and one day one of the little girls, who happens to be Muslim, comes up to the tree and ties a little ribbon to the tree, because every year people from the neighborhood come and tie their wishes to the tree. So anyway, this little girl comes and ties her wish to the tree and asks for a friend. And the tree takes it upon itself to find this little girl a friend, and the story that is told is so beautiful and timely. It's the exact right amount of serious subject matter that feels heavy, but also so heartwarming. You leave this book with your heart full and your tear ducts empty, and I loved it. I also reread one of my favorites from childhood, and it continued to delight me. I hadn't read it since I was about 13 years old probably, and that was Walk Two Moons by Sharon Creech. This did win the Newbery back in whenever it was published, I think 1994 maybe, and I wasn't sure whether I was still gonna love it, but I had nothing to fear. I loved it so much. And once again, the writing, beautiful. And what I would describe as whimsical or quirky, but some people's definition of that might be different. So the writing isn't weird, but like some of the language that's used, just, it gives the characters a lot of personality. Especially, I would say, the main character, whose name is Salamanca, Sal for short, her grandparents, Graham and Gramps, oh my gosh, loves of my life. And their marriage, if my marriage looks anything like their marriage 30 years down the road or 40 years down the road, I feel like I would have made a success of my marriage, because it was so beautiful. Their relationship with Sal was wonderful. The book is basically a coming-of-age story, but in this book, she has moved with her father to a new city, and she feels like her world has kind of been ripped apart, and she goes on a road trip with her grandparents to go and find her mother. Along the way, Sal is telling the story of some of the friendships that she's made in her new town, and some of the things that are happening with her friends are very similar to things that have happened in her own life in the past, and so she's working through all of these things, and I don't want to say any more than that because it would spoil the beauty and magic of this book. It's wonderful. I highly recommend reading Walk to Moons if you never have. I also picked up the book Echo by Pam Munoz Ryan, and oh man, I have never read a book quite like this. It was World War II historical fiction. However, the story is bookended by a fairy tale. Basically, woven throughout this story is this magical harmonica that is introduced to you in the fairy tale at the beginning. And this harmonica finds its way into the hands of 3 different children in 3 different parts of the world, and how their story comes together in the end is so satisfying. Each of their stories ends on a little bit of a cliffhanger, but by the end of the book, you are not left wondering what happened. You are left once again with your hearts full and your tear ducts empty. But in this book, along with most of the other books, I cried not tears of sadness, but tears of joy and warmth. Like, it was tears because my heart was overflowing. It was so beautiful. If you like music, definitely read this book, and perhaps listen to the audiobook. I have heard wonderful things about the audiobook. I have not read the audiobook myself, but actually I finished this book and then started to listen to the audiobook immediately after because I had heard such amazing things. There's lots of music in this story, and every time they mention music, the audiobook plays the music that's being spoken of, which just makes the experience very rich. And I found this story in itself complex and wonderful, and exactly the kind of book that I was looking for, and one that I think everyone should read, whether you are 5 or 55 or 95. This book was amazing. And finally, I'm so glad I ended the month on this book. For Middle Grade March, our group book for the month was The Girl Who Drank the Moon, and I loved this book. I thought, once again, this is a book meant for all ages. It told a story that could be enjoyed and appreciated by everyone, and the themes, even if they go over the heads of little kids, the story itself is enough to keep everyone reading because, yeah, it just had a little bit of everything. It was a wonderful story with a wonderful message. There was so much to talk about and digest with this book, and I am so glad that I finally read it. It more than deserved the Newbery Medal that it won last year or 2 years ago. The premise of The Girl Who Drank the Moon is that there's a town in which every year they sacrifice a child to the witch who lives in the woods in order to protect themselves. Or at least that's what they think they're doing. But really, at the same time, this witch comes and finds these abandoned children, and she doesn't understand why this town keeps leaving their children in the woods, in the middle of the woods, basically to die. So she takes the child and brings them to a new home on the other side of the woods in what is called the Free Cities, and gives them a home, finds them a home with new families. Along the way, she feeds these children starlight in order to continue to nourish them. But one child she accidentally feeds moonlight, and that awakens some magic in this child, and the story takes off from there. It is a story that talks about the powerful versus the powerless, and what happens when we push our sorrow and our pain down and ignore it. Nothing good, I can tell you that, nothing good. It's also about consequences and forgiveness and kindness and, most of all, love. And it's so wonderfully, beautifully written. This is the kind of book, like I said, this really, truly can be enjoyed by every age. I read an interview with Kelly Barnhill where she says that she expects a lot from her readers. She does not dumb down the language, which is exactly how a middle grade book should be written. It should not pander, and this book does not pander. I can't recommend this book highly enough. I can't recommend almost every single book I read this month highly enough. They were all just astounding and blew me out of the water. I know I've mentioned this quote before, but I'm going to say it again because it's as true now as it was the last time I said it, and that is, it's a C.S. Lewis quote, and he said, A children's story that can only be enjoyed by children is not a good children's story in the slightest. And it's so true. Good children's literature can and should be enjoyed by all ages. You will be reminded about the really, truly important things in life when you read children's literature. I feel like I'm a better person when I read these books because it reminds me of what it means to be instilled with things like kindness and love and generosity and forgiveness and acceptance. It's so beautiful. I want everyone to read more middle grade, and that is why we did Middle Grade March, to encourage people to read middle grade. We are going to do it again next year, and we are so glad for everyone who participated. I was just blown away by everyone and their enthusiasm for Middle Grade March, and so we're really excited to keep going with it next year. But that doesn't mean that you can't read middle grade every other month during the year, and I am determined that I'm going to read more middle grade throughout the year and not just save it for Middle Grade March. So with that, thank you all again so much for your involvement with Middle Grade March. If you have wrap-ups that I haven't seen, which I guess you might not know because I don't always comment on every video that I watch, but please leave links below because I'd love to see what everyone else read during the month. If you read even one middle grade book in the month of March, I would love to hear about it. I guess that's all for now. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope that you are having a great beginning to April and that that the sun starts to shine if it's cold weather where you are, and spring brings warmth to your hearts and the world around you. I'm so excited for the change of the seasons. So anyway, have a great day everyone, and I will talk to you later. Bye!